Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Wherever you are in the world, welcome back to The Caring Economy with me, Toby Usnik. Today's guest is both a friend and a colleague for many years, Richard Marshall. He is the head of the corporate affairs practice at Korn Ferry. Korn Ferry is the largest executive recruiter in the world. It's a management consultancy that is traded on the New York Stock Exchange, about a $2 billion company with about 8,000 employees. He is a rock star in our space, which is basically communications, corporate affairs, media relations, crisis communications, investor relations, and so forth. But he's also just a great guy. So Richard Marshall, welcome to The Caring Economy.
Hey, thank you, Toby, and thank you for that overly kind introduction. Really great to be with you, and thank you for inviting me to participate on this platform. I have to say, I'm really honored. You've had such an impressive and accomplished roster of guests you've had on so far, all of whom have had really amazing career journeys. So thank you for including me.
My pleasure. As you say that, Richard, what I'm thinking about is what we've had from the start is a relationship, and I think that that's one of the philosophical foundations for my life and my business and this show about relationships, not just transactions. And I feel the same way about you as a professional recruiter, but also as just an all around good guy. The relationship thing is so important. Would you agree?
No, absolutely. Look, I mean, life is a journey, and building and keeping and growing relationships is really important. I mean, whether it's for something in the moment or longer term, I mean, it's a really rich, wonderful way to extend your network and to really gain insight and perspective. It just makes life richer when you've got lasting relationships in them.
And really leads to impact, I think. Tell us a little bit about your life journey, Richard Marshall. Sort of, my listeners like to know sort of not just how you got where you got, but quite frankly, any sort of bumps you may have had along the road where you turned left when others went right, or that in retrospect were probably fantastic, even though at the time they might have been a little bit shocking to the system.
Yeah, well, obviously, I never had any kind of master roadmap for this. I don't think that anybody does, especially in today's world. But I sort of look at my career and life journey as really in sort of three chapters. So, early days for me were really around government and politics, and then pivoted and went into the corporate side of my career, which I spent 20 years in-house as a chief communications officer at three different companies. And now my third chapter, really, which is what I'm doing now, which is in recruiting and consulting. So I kind of bucket my journey into those three areas. And, quick background on me, I grew up middle class, Midwestern upbringing. My father was a college professor who taught sociology and mass communications in the late 60s. And so I think early on, I was kind of drawn into social issues and politics, having seen that as a kid on campus.
Mhm.
And went on, got my college degree, got a political science and business marketing background. And I think more, maybe the first pivot point for me was an internship that I did in Washington, D.C. with the senior senator from my home state. And I like the idea of service.
Mhm.
I like the idea of being at the center of power, and also feeling like you had a seat to see how things got done. So when I graduated from college, my first job was working in the Commerce Department, and I had a lofty job. I was the international trade specialist promoting Indiana agricultural products. I had no idea what I was doing, but I got to travel to 23 countries in 2 years and promoting products and building relationships, working with embassies and consulates and trade associations. It was a great way to really gain some experience around business, around culture,
Mhm.
around different kinds of business nuance. And so it was a really rich and rewarding experience for me. Um, I moved over to USA Today. I left government at that point and took a short stint, went to USA Today in a marketing role as they were launching the paper, for those that may remember that in the early 80s, but got recruited back to government and the state of Indiana had offered me a job to be the ombudsman for the state after it had landed a big car plant deal for the Japanese car company Subaru.
Mm.
And so my role became a little bit of a shuttle diplomat. I was the intermediary between the Japanese officials and all the state agencies that were involved in this big incentive package. And so again, another wonderful experience for me. And when that was over, I got recruited into Subaru to be their head of, originally to be their PR manager and eventually become the head of communications there. And that was sort of that launched me into chapter 2, which was really my corporate career. And so I was at Subaru for 11 years, and then I got recruited to Silicon Valley and ran communications and corporate affairs for a company called Silicon Graphics, and then moved on to Home Depot in Atlanta, where I ran that organization, the communications organization, for 5 years. So that chapter 2, really was the corporate side, and it was the top corporate affairs roles at 3 companies, 3 different industries, 3 different locations, and 5 different CEOs.
Mhm.
So it was all, I think, really interesting and an interesting part of my journey.
Yeah.
And chapter 3 now is what I'm doing, which is, and I've been doing this now for 15 years, working with Korn Ferry, and I've got a wide range of clients that I work with, different geographies, different challenges, different industry sectors, and loving that. So, and
Fantastic.
here we are today.
So one of the constant themes I hear across those different chapters is purpose. You talk about serving in government, which is always noble in my mind, although sometimes besmirched these past few years. Um, but we're getting back where we need to get, I think. And then in corporate communications, but also with brands. I mean, I think of Subaru as having the most incredibly loyal consumer base. I don't have a Subaru, but it's probably the car of choice where we have our home. And then I think about Home Depot and what the founders there have done philanthropically for Atlanta, and just the kind of can-do-it spirit that the whole brand stands for. I wonder about that concept of purpose, Richard. How does that define you? Has it been a conscious effort on your part? Can you talk a little bit about purpose?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I hadn't really thought of it that way, but I have to say that the Subaru experience was really foundational for me because it really was a purpose-driven brand. And I came in at a time when they were really trying to be a mass marketer and were failing miserably. We were 3rd or 4th on everybody's shopping list. And I remember being in the leadership conversations. And at the time, I was more of a junior PR person. But we were really trying to find our way in the market. And it really sort of came down to who are we and what do we do best and what's our reason for being. And I think what we realized is that we had a unique product, narrow though it was, and we had a really loyal customer base that was very focused on, active lifestyle, and we really went into what I call sort of deep reflection around where we would fit in the marketplace. And there were some challenging times because I remember we were probably 3/4 away from pulling out of the US market. We were losing money on every car that we sold. We had stacking up inventory. And our CFO at the time, who later became the CEO, said, really, we have to carve out what is our reason for being? What is our purpose? And that really was a galvanizing moment for all of us. And from a communication standpoint, and I had moved up to the top role at that time, was how do we communicate this to the marketplace?
Mhm.
And so we were very purposeful and thoughtful, and I think strategic around being sort of the consummate niche marketer. And we were integrated in how we did that. So it was not only picking the audiences and going after those those audiences that we knew were loyal to us, but also the active lifestyle. We were also the first car company that actively started working with the LGBT community. And I remember we did a campaign with Martina Navratilova, the the rainbow affinity card, and it was a risky proposition. in the late 90s, and there was, some concern within our dealer network about what the backlash might be. But, I think credit to the leadership team there that we decided that it was an important roll of the dice for us to put a stake in the ground, and we launched the Outback. We did a number of big campaigns around that, and it really started to gain traction. And I think once you get clarity around who you are and what you stand for, it really resonates. And we certainly saw that. And we went from being sort of a worst in business performance to best business performance in about 3 years. And it really saved the company. So for me, that brand experience and that sort of near death experience, as we used to call it inside, was really pivotal for me and my learning journey.
That's, as a gay man, I can say that the Subaru probably is the number one car from my lesbian girlfriends. So I think what you seeded then is still bearing fruit. Tell us a little bit if you can reflect upon that executive at that time who had that bold question, that somewhat fearful question about what are we, who are we? What do you know what he was thinking at the time, or how he had that bold leadership move?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it wasn't sort of a one single moment. It was a number of conversations, and we got a lot of pushback also from the Japanese who built the product. We were the marketing arm, and so there was a lot of uneasiness about, is this the right direction? But when you're in desperate straits, and we were at the time, everybody was moving to truck-based sport utility vehicles, and we were a car-based four-wheel drive platform. We were trying to say, we're an alternative and good quality product. But we had it was kind of a desperation move, and I think we all realized it. I mean, the CFO used to come into the meetings and say to us, he said, I remember him saying at one point, he said, I don't want to be the Grim Reaper here, but this meeting, all of our time that we're spending on this is costing us X thousands of dollars. And we are losing money on every car that's being sold. So we need to make some decisions here. So I think there was financial pressure, and it was the CEO at the time, George Muller, who really made the commitment and said, look, we need to go this direction. This is the only way that we can make money. We need to align with the core target audiences that are buying our product. They're loyal, they'll repurchase. And so it was I think a coalescing of a lot of these things that all came together.
Ladies and gentlemen, again today we have on the Caring Economy Richard Marshall, who is the head of the corporate affairs practice at Korn Ferry, the world's largest executive search firm, traded on the New York Stock Exchange with call letters KFY. Richard, Korn Ferry has recently come out with a new report on the rise of the CSO, the Chief Sustainability Officer. I think that is a reflection of what you were seeing the roots of, or seeding the roots of, way back when at Subaru and Home Depot around corporate responsibility. Can you tell us a little bit about the report and perhaps philosophically how Korn Ferry looks at the whole practice area of chief sustainability officers?
Yeah, well, thank you for the plug. Yeah, it's a new paper that we released just a couple of weeks ago. It's called The Rise of the Chief Sustainability Officer. And got to give credit to a lot of my colleagues in Asia and Europe who helped us to pull this together. It's really a compilation of about 50 interviews that we did with chief executives and chief sustainability officers to get a pulse on how is the role evolving, how do you ensure success in the organization, and what are the key skills and traits that the leaders need for these roles. And we picked some of the most successful brands across all industry sectors. I mean, just to give you kind of a profile, we had Unilever, Danone, Vodafone, Syngenta, among others. And so we really used the opportunity to kind of pull out from them, like, how is the function evolving? What are the success factors, and what are they seeing in terms of trends? Mm-hmm. And I mean, just a couple of quick headlines is, I think that what we heard is that sustainability now has never been more important than it has been. Certainly the the climate has changed, not only the business or the ecological climate, but the business climate, the political climate, all of it. That the timing is right for this, and investors are more socially conscious. So these things are all sort of dynamics that are playing around, I think, moving this function forward. The other thing that we heard too is that, within these companies, sustainability is systemic. It touches everything. And typically in these organizations, it sits somewhere between the office of the strategy office and the CEO's office. And it touches every aspect of business. It's fully aligned and integrated. And it kind of boils down to three things. Is the short summary of the paper is really, it comes down to executive committee membership, the buy-in. The CEO sponsor is absolutely key. Secondly, the CSO, the Chief Sustainability Officer, needs to understand all of the business impacts and look at it from a 360-degree perspective and build those critical alliances internally. And then thirdly, it's also the recognition that the CSO is a guide, and not it's a partnership approach that needs to be successful. It's not a mandate. So there's shared accountability in moving these things forward. And I think one of my favorite quotes, and I'll stop after this, is that the CSO, the Chief Sustainability Officer of Unilever, said, sustainability has to be part of the value proposition, demonstrating at least one of building growth, building trust, and reducing risk or lowering costs. In this way, you show the direct link to the business case. And I think that's really well said, and I think is a good summary for what's contained in the paper.
Absolutely. That's been my observation and my experience. I also think that it's too easy. It used to be too easy. I think it's harder now. It used to be too easy to think that, oh, we'll just appoint a CSO and then we're good to go. When I built the corporate social responsibility platform at Christie's, which we called Art and Soul, it was not for me to be the answer to all things sustainable, transparency, volunteerism oriented, and so forth. It was really to be catalytic, and as
Right.
your proposal suggested, that lead person needs to be really the I guess the evangelist in chief
Yeah.
and the
Mhm.
sole answer, right?
Yeah, absolutely. No. Yeah, we should have brought you into this interview as well, because I think so much of what you've shared with me personally, and what you accomplished in that role is very spot on. So I think this is going to be, when you read this, Toby, you'll be reliving your time at Christie's, I'm sure.
It'll be joyful. It's interesting because I had a great run, a decade at Christie's, and I will say when we were pioneering things like the green auction, 3-year commitment to 4 environmental groups, and all the things that good CSO practitioners are up to, we were ahead of our time. And I'm not
Mhm.
saying that because it was my baby. It was really a group effort, and the legacies
Were though. Yeah.
this past, let's see, this is now April. In February, Christie's announced a really broad, sweeping commitment to what we call a race to zero, trying to be net zero by 2030.
Mhm.
And really, really embracing it now in a way that's business critical, not just for Christie's, but for governments, for organizations, those that you're recruiting for, no doubt.
Mhm.
So PSO becomes critical in making those commitments. But, you know, I often say in my own career coaching and helping others, like leadership can be a lonely place. You can look to your left and look to your right, and you're not necessarily going to find compadres there. But I think there's a gut check that kind of goes into some of this, which doesn't necessarily fit into algorithms or maybe into your databases, even at Korn Ferry. But I think that's where you come in as the recruiter who has that human piece, right? Like your
Yeah.
tagline is, as I recall, is a radically human organization. And that's, I think, your secret ingredient, Korn Ferry, and you, Richard Marshall, is the head of that practice area.
Well, I think that is something that our organization is really focused on. They always say, talent is the differentiator, but especially in these days and times, you know, talent and the human element of talent, and being, mindful of all perspectives and being inclusive of all perspectives is really going to be the differentiator between the winners and losers in organizations and in business moving forward. And I think, nothing has shined that light more brighter than the challenges that we faced in the past year. It's been kind of the perfect storm of all of these issues that have challenged all of us personally and professionally. So it's a moment.
I'm glad you said that because that's the perfect segue to from the CSO report to DE&I, right? Diversity, equity, inclusion. I was on a call this morning with my arts comm group, and we were honored to have Levita Turner, who's the new chief diversity officer at the Metropolitan Museum. And while I can't
Mhm.
discuss the details of that meeting because it's a closed door session, it was wonderful to hear her say that I'm paraphrasing, but she would want at the end of her tenure that the legacy be that all activities done by the staff and the organization are done with an equity lens.
Mhm.
I think it's the same whether it's CSO or DE&I. It's not one person, one chief diversity officer in this case, who can check that box, right? It's a
Right.
culture shift, it's a philosophical, practical, ongoing exercise. And I believe in this. I think it is the
Yeah.
only hope we have. And I love that so many organizations are now embracing it, hopefully soon enough and fast enough.
Yeah. Well,
Uh,
it's about time, right? I mean, in some ways it's kind of an obvious thing, but for so many organizations, and I know that my colleagues in the firm, we've always placed an emphasis on diversity and inclusion, and do that in any of the searches that we do. But our advisory services, in terms of coaching organizations on how to build that capability within the organization, has been incredibly busy, and it's heartening in some way to see that there's great opportunity, and it's energizing for my colleagues that have been around this for their entire careers and advising people. But it's also disheartening in a way that that there's so much need for it right now, that we're not further along. But it really is, it's the topic of every conversation, whether it's search or advisory consulting work. Every organization that I can think of is really sort of wrestling with this and trying to figure out, how can we build capability? How can we be more inclusive? How do we design systems that are equal and fair to all? And how do we provide opportunity, for our employees? And how do we bring more people in? So I think it's despite the terrible things that are happening, I think it's a positive moment that these discussions are elevating not only to the executive level, but also to the board level. And I think, the old saying, what gets measured, gets, you move the needle. And I think more organizations now are so acutely aware and are really trying, I think, to implement the right kind of systems and protocols to do the right thing. And I'm proud of my firm that we've got the capability. And certainly uh, we're not the only ones that do it. There's a lot of fine organizations out there that are doing similar sorts of things. But it always makes me proud when I see that we've brought on new clients and we're advising them from the board all the way down to sort of look at DE&I on a holistic perspective.
Yes. Ladies and gentlemen, stay with us till after this break. Ladies and gentlemen, again, today we have Richard Marshall from Korn Ferry. He is the head of the corporate affairs practice there. He is one of the best allies you could hope for, both in terms of career advancement and recruitment, but also just as a good guy. Richard, you have those Midwestern values I like to think that I also have. It's not limited to people from the Midwest, but I've always admired your sort of poise and your just the relationship focus you bring to business. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Question for you: in talking about boards and DE&I, I wonder, I also think there's a more and more opportunity because of social media and the times we live in to go younger to actually the rank and file. You have two young daughters. I wonder how you, either as a parent or as a professional, think we should be engaging young people in expertise both in recruitment, but also in these bigger issues of DE&I, social justice, climate, and so forth. Do you give them more attention now, or what do you do?
Well, it's yeah, and it kind of hits home for me because I do have two daughters. They would argue they're not young. They're 26 and 22 now, but they're both of mixed race, and they both have faced, challenges in their lives. And they sometimes get tired of conversations that we have around this because a lot of times they tend to be focused more on career orientation. But you know the but I think young people today, I mean, it is a very none of us had sort of a playbook when I was in high school or in college. Nobody said, here's the path you can take. I had to figure it out. My daughters and other people's children will have to figure this out as well. You try to, what I try to stress with my daughters is, be open to opportunities. Getting to where you think you want to be, it's not going to be a straight line.
Mhm.
There's going to be twists and turns along the ways. There's going to be triumphs and disappointment, and you have to learn from those. What can you take from that, and recognize that it's also one misstep isn't fatal. There's opportunities to rebound, learn from that, pivot, and move your career direction forward.
Mhm.
And so I think the younger folks who are dialed in so much on social media, I the one thing I always told my daughters is be careful what you post, because that will always come back to haunt you, and it lives forever. And that's one thing that didn't exist, I think, when I was coming up earlier in my career.
Mhm.
And I think that is a new dynamic that younger people have to be mindful of. But it is a open world. I think there's so many, and open, what I mean in terms of opportunity. You can really chart your own course. So I think, sometimes take what I like to think about is take stock in terms of what you're good at, what you're not good at, especially when you're starting out. Learning what you don't like is just as important, as specializing on the things that you're really good at, because you can kind of stay away from those things, or that you don't want to move down that track. So be open, take risk. When you're young, it's the perfect time to try things out. If it doesn't work out, you can pivot and move in a different direction. So be open, take risk, and really follow your passion, because at the end of the day, you're going to spend half of your life working, and or in whatever pursuit you're doing. You really want to enjoy it and love it, and be committed to it.
Do you have, this is a personal question, you don't have to answer if you don't want, but do you have any examples, without naming names, of how you as a professional have had to nudge or coach or delicately guide someone, such as the client, around a sensitive, offensive statement that he or she may have made about a mixed race person or someone other than themselves? I mean, we don't bring our families physically to work with us most days, right? So
Yeah.
people say know that Richard Marshall from Korn Ferry has two mixed race daughters, but you do, and you worked at one point for a Japanese company. So I suspect, and as I recall, your daughter is Asian American. So uh, have you? How do you delicately, diplomatically, responsibly help someone understand that their words have impact that they might not really fully grasp?
Boy, that's a good question. I'm trying to think of examples.
On the spot. So it's
Yeah.
fine. It would be really helpful to our listeners, particularly with the recent surge in Asian hate crimes. And
Yeah. Well, I think that my general philosophy is try to de-escalate things. It's too easy for things to get heated, and especially now. I mean, with all the violence that we see, I mean, whatever we can do to de-escalate issues, and for those that have made an honest mistake and don't necessarily understand the impact of their words, or what they've insinuated, you know a a sidebar conversation to say to somebody, you may not realize it, but you offended this person in the room. And just be mindful of that. Not calling them out necessarily in the moment or embarrassing them, but trying to help educate and coach them. And I think people are reasonable. I don't know. Maybe this is the Midwestern. I think if we can take down the temperature of some of these things and just have a conversation, we're all people.
Yep.
We're all flesh and blood. I mean, and be sensitive to understand that different people's perspectives bring different things to a conversation.
Yeah.
And so I know in my daughter's they're living in the South, and my youngest, and she is very socially aware, and she can she can get amped up sometimes pretty quickly, and so that's part of what I try to do is to take the temperature down or diffuse it with humor or something to sort of let's put this in perspective.
Well
It
said.
doesn't always work, but
Yeah.
I
But
generally try to do that.
I think it's partly, I will say, as a fellow Midwesterner, I think it's partly our Midwestern ways, but also I think it's a good business training. That's Dale Carnegie 101, right? Like, don't.
Yeah, I guess so. I forgot I took that course about 40 years ago.
It's a good book. I'd highly recommend it. So, Richard, one last question, and then I'll let you have the last word. The evolution of executive recruiting in your vast career, my gosh, you've been at the top of the heap with the largest executive search firm, Korn Ferry. You've been doing it for decades, been previously in the corporate sector. How have you seen, if at all, the state of recruiting change, and what have been some of the constants?
Yeah, well, I think when I came in 15 years ago, executive recruiters, headhunters, and I had never worked with one until I was in my last role. Um, Actually, my last two roles. That's not fair, but it was always a little bit of a mystery to me how it worked. How do I get on the short list? How do I raise my hand for opportunities? And I know when I came in and started in executive search, it tended to be, predominantly a male-oriented field. It was a bunch of old guys that had literally Rolodexes and would flip cards and say, "Oh, well, I know these five people," and it was very transactional. If I'm thinking about and honestly answering this, it was a very transaction oriented business. It was sort of
Battle
putting
calls.
butt yeah, putting butts in seats, right? It's like we got a need, we fill a seat, we get paid. I think what's evolved, and certainly for our firm, because search is episodic. There's a need, you fill a need, it's a particular requirement or particular role. And what we've really tried to do is morph into more of a strategic advisory firm where it's not only finding talent if there's a need for that, but it's also grooming talent and coaching talent and helping organizations to think about the broader asset value of the talent. And so I think what's changed, certainly from my perspective, is more of a longer term, more holistic relationship with clients.
Yeah.
And also with our placements, it's also sort of helping them to be successful, onboarding, coaching. If they're first time in the role, what are the things that they need some help with? How do they need to, if they're coming from a different industry and they're a number two in one industry and going to a number one in a different industry, how can we help them? How can we make some introductions for people in the community that they're moving to or within the industry that they're moving into? So it's helping to kind of put an action plan in place that can build on the relationship and something that matures over time. It's not just sort of filling a role and then disappearing.
There
So
is again that R word, the relationship that is that
yeah, yeah,
defines you and us, I think, Richard.
yep.
Ladies and gentlemen, again, I want to say thank you to my friend and colleague Richard Marshall today. Richard is the head of the corporate affairs practice at Korn Ferry. Richard, what are your call letters for Korn Ferry? Is it KF?
KFY, yeah. Or if anybody wants to take a look at that paper, the Rising Chief Sustainability Officer, you can go to the Korn Ferry Institute. It's kornferry.com, and I think you can download it there.
Terrific. Again, Richard Marshall is head of the corporate affairs practice at Korn Ferry, the world's largest executive recruiter, and $2 billion size firm with 8,000 employees. Anywhere in the world, our dear listeners, that you want to get a leg up, this is the search firm to know. So Richard Marshall, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Hey, Toby, thank you. And if I can put in one plug, first of all, anybody that hasn't read your book yet, be sure to pick up Toby's book. It's great. It's full of insights. It's a quick read. And actually, Toby, I don't know whether I told you this or not, but I've shared that with a number of people that I've placed in the top roles, and I use that as part of their orientation package. So congratulations to you. And for anybody that hasn't picked it up, be sure you do, because it's a wonderful read, and Toby did a great job putting that together.
Well, thank you, Richard Marshall. I'm actually working on the second edition now, so we'll have you in that one.
Okay.